I gave a talk at the annual meeting for the AASB, and as part of it I was talking about the importance of dates in our history, our regulatory history, and this was the year that 9 CFR 7119 was originally published. And Neil, if you were to read this article out of National Hog Farmer and just change some of the names of the people that are mentioned, it would sound exactly like discussions in 2004 and 5. But that's what we've been working off of as an industry since the late 80s, is the 9 CFR 7119. So when we had USAIP morph into NIAA and morph into ADT, we had already, by the time ADT came around and we realized it was going to be a mandatory rule for the movement of animals across state lines, we said, well, we kind of already got that in place, so that's good. We seem to be compliant there with ADT, and in the ADT rule it says specifically on the swine side, 9 CFR 7119 takes precedence. And then our Swine ID program standards that we had built under in about 2004 with our Pork Industry Identification Working Group, we've been moving those forward on implementation, and it's been going pretty well, but we've learned some things along the way, and we're also trying to take it to the next step for the pork industry. A lot has to do with what Dr. Scheer was talking about. In our industry, we're getting $62 per head added value from exports. And so we have to be competitive with our export competition. You've got Canada now with a mandatory swine ID program that involves mandatory reporting. We've got other countries like Argentina, especially in the Santa Catarina area, who have the same disease status as we are, and they're competing against us with China and Russia, and trying to get into even higher value markets like Japan. And so we have to have a system in place. And actually for the beef industry, China's a tremendous market for us when they're not playing political games. And even when they are, a lot of pork goes into China. It just goes through Hong Kong instead of other routes. But I can only imagine what the per head value of cattle might go up to if you guys could even get in and exploit that market. We're only providing less than 2% of the pork demand in China right now as the U.S. And it's just incredible, the growth out there. But if the beef industry could pop into that market, that's going to be a good thing for the price of cattle, I think, if it follows the same model as what exports have done for pork. So we've got our Swine ID program standards that we've been implementing, and in our world it's fairly simple. We're trying to make sure that our production systems are making sure that they have premises registered, and that in their record-keeping systems that they are putting in their prem IDs next to those site identifiers that they previously used before we tried to standardize it, making sure we've got the source pin, the destination pin, group lot, number of head, and the date and the movement. That way we've got that record there. As well as on the packing side, trying to do those things to help link that full traceability or pre-harvest traceability all the way to the packer. So I'll hit on each of these in a second. So for us, the end-all be-all is the nationally standardized premises identifier, and this part of the rationale was originally, when NIS was going to eventually be mandatory, we were going to move to this one nationally standardized number. So the pork industry picked up on that and ran with it because we realized the value of having a nationally standardized number. And obviously, politics being what they were, we ended up moving, and we now have 2 official site identifiers, which is a bit of a challenge for us because as an industry, we've decided that this is the number. This is the one that we like to play with, and we've integrated it into a lot of our own industry programs like pork quality assurance. We've wanted to use this number as part of our national surveillance programming. We wanted to use it as part of business continuity and emergency prep. And so we've really focused on this being the number that we want to be the site identifier for the pork industry. So in order to help producers do that, we worked with USDA to build some tools. And so we've had since, I don't know, Neil, 2009, maybe the ability to validate prems through our website, through the National Repository, which has been a tremendous tool because we now, when people enter their site assessments for pork quality assurance, that has to be a valid prem ID before they're allowed to enter any other data. Remember, garbage in equals garbage out. This allows us to make sure that those prims are actually validated prims in the United States, which is a good thing. And so our producers can go to our website, put their PIN in, it gets validated, and then they can print their barcodes, which has been really beneficial to what we learned with PED, and I'll talk about that in a second. But another way of validating prims is obviously the official premises ID number tag, which we worked with USDA along with the Swine ID Implementation Task Force to develop this tag back in 2007-ish, and it became available in 2008. We started doing education and outreach, and we got all of our early adopters to start using it, which was great. They understood the value of increasing our traceability on our cull sows and boars. But then, just like with premises registration, once you get to that certain level, only education will get you to. You have to have something, whether it's a federal mandate or an industry mandate, to make everybody comply. And so with premises registration, when Packers started requiring the site assessments for pork quality assurance, right before that we were sitting at maybe 75-80% of estimated swine farms having PINs. When everybody had to do a site assessment, which requires you to have a PIN, we jumped and went over 100% in less than 3 months. And that's because it was an industry mandate for a process that involved having to have a prim ID. And so when Packers started requiring that, that was a real nice way to get everybody as close to compliance as possible. And the same thing on the sow tags, the pin tags. We're probably at 40% industry-wide from education. And then when we found out from the Packers that they were going to require these things as a condition of sale, like I just heard from a gentleman from South Dakota, all of a sudden, state vets are starting to get calls about, I need a prim ID because I got to get this tagged. And how many of those producers were out there that we didn't even really know were out there that didn't have a PIN? So having a Packer requirement for these, and I'll talk about that in a second, has been a good way to elevate our compliance for the official PIN tags. So there they are, 3 manufacturers that make them. You've got Allflex and Destron, and then there's Ytex. And this has been probably one of the most interesting parts of my job over the years, is moving from an industry voluntary program to a Packer mandated, thus industry mandated program. We've got 9 Packers out there that make up the greater percentage of the sow cull market that require these as a condition of sale. And as part of that requirement, after January 1st, 2015, we started seeing different Packers taking discounts. And so some Packers were kind of being nice and saying, all right, month 1, it's $1 off per head. Month 2, it'll be $5. Month 3, it'll be $7, and then $15. All right, well, that was good. And then some of them said, to heck with it. You don't have a pin tag. I'm taking $50 off your sow. Nothing drives a producer in getting a tag that's less than $1, than losing $50 when they sell that sow. And I hear from these producers, I get lots of calls about how they got to the market and they lost $300-400 on a load of sows, and they burn my ear off because they're mad. And you go, well, did you know it was coming? Yeah. Did you get your tags bought? No, put it off till the last minute. Or you got guys that call me up and they'll go, I didn't know anything about this. And I said, well, do you get our magazines and all that? We've been educating on this for 2 years now. Well, no. I said, well, can I put you in our database so you can get those in the future? I know it's not going to help you now. Well, hell no, I don't want to be in your database. How do I win that? I don't win that.
Do pig farmers not pack firearms?
Yeah. I remember some of the stories from the pseudo rabies eradication days that, yeah, they do might carry some shotguns here or there. But right now, where we're sitting at on these tags, there was a lot of consternation from some of the Packers, but more so their suppliers, the ones that do the consolidation, sorting, and shipping. They were so worried prior to 2015 that what happens when we get all these sows that don't show up with tags, because I just bought it, now I'm stuck with it, and it doesn't have a pin tag, and Johnsonville ain't going to buy it, and everybody was worried about it. But right after the date hit, I started working with the 9 Packers to find out compliance rate, and we're sitting at about 80 to 95% compliance with the tag, sows having and boars having the tags. And that's with the challenges that we're having with supply of pin tags. I'm not sure anybody estimated the true number of people that either waited or off the grid, or, I mean, we're 3 months into this thing, and I'm talking to the tag manufacturers, and they are really working their butts off to try to put these tags out there on top of just their normal work that they do every day. And we're still seeing a bubble there where producers are having to wait 4-6 weeks to get tags depending upon which ones they want to purchase. So that gives me a lot of other angry phone calls about, I can't get me a tag and this, that, and the other. And so we have to work through that. I mean, we represent all producers from the smallest of the small to the largest of the large. It seems like most of the large companies were using these tags before the requirement. They kind of got it. They knew what was coming. What we're seeing now, the calls that I'm getting are mostly what I'll call your independent, small, 10 sows, outdoor. I just gave a talk to the Nyman Ranch pork production annual meeting. You know, that room was full of folks that are previously never had to tag a sow with the official tag, and now they are. And so, I mean, I think we're getting into these populations of folks that weren't necessarily considered part of the overall commercial side. But it's an important population nonetheless, especially for our surveillance programs, because we need to be able to survey those folks as well. So I think over time, as we start to figure out how to use these tags to better target surveillance for, right now brucellosis and pseudorabies, but the foreign animal diseases, I think these tags can go a long way to helping us figure out where we can do the best targeting of that type of surveillance. One thing I did want to bring up, and I think, did you visit with the assemblies about the issue with the PIN plus management number versus PIN tag?
Conference call on Friday.
Oh, okay.
They got the draft.
Okay. Well, you'll be state folks will be getting a call with USDA. One of the areas that's been somewhat confusing for folks is that prior to the PIN tag even being around, and after and even before we had the nationally standardized PRIM, one of the processes for identifying gilts moving for breeding purposes was to put the official site identifier plus a herd unique management number on a tag, and that was what was her ID to get her across state lines for production purposes. Back before the definition for official ID tag, this was considered official identification of breeding stock moving for production. I think Neil is going to be visiting with the states about that these tags can still function in that particular role. One of the questions I keep getting is, why not just use an official PIN tag to do this on the front end, on the front of the book end? And in our industry, where most of our commingling occurs is on the back of the book end. And so we have to, really it's the reverse of cattle guys in that we have to have that official ID occur when those sows are commingled or prior to commingling, because we don't know necessarily where they're going to go. If they show up with a PIN tag, then they're sorted into groups, and this group of fat sows goes to Johnsonville, and the skinny group goes over to here to Tennessee Pride or wherever. That's where we have to have that rock solid traceability from the sow plant back to the production site she came from when she was marketed. On the front end, our world is a lot more tight as far as the traceability there. But just know that from our perspective, that we're having some challenges with education on this with producers, but hopefully there'll be some clarification there about particularly these PIN plus management number tags used for moving breeding stock for production purposes. So what we've been focusing on now, so we've hit some milestones, I think. Premises registration, we're going pretty good. I mean, it is now, I think, everybody recognizes it's the standard identifier for our industry on the pig side. Our biggest gap on traceability for individual ID was sows and boars, so now we've got the requirement for the official PIN tags for harvest. That's great. Now, our biggest area and our biggest challenge right now is part of what we're calling our Put a Pin on It campaign, and we're doing this with AASB as well, in that in order to make the connections in our industry that we need to make, we have to basically adopt the premises ID number as a course of normal business in the records that producers, packers keep basically throughout the pork chain, and I'll try to describe that here. One of our big things is, put prem IDs on these health papers, and what we're telling pork producers is stop using paper health papers. Use one of the electronic companies that are out there. Use GVL's product. Use an electronic, because if we're going to trace out for a foot and mouth disease outbreak, these papers are not going to cut it. It should be an electronic format, period. And that's what we're telling producers is that let's make sure that we're using the best forms that we can, so we have that electronically captured. Another thing that we want to make sure that producers are doing, and our packers are starting to require it, is put prem ID of the sending premises on your bill of lading. That's very, very important from the standpoint of just preparedness. Can you imagine if we had an FMD outbreak, how valuable it would be in your state if your packers already cut an agreement with you to share the list of prem IDs that they have taken animals from over whatever period you want to know? Wouldn't that be beneficial the day of FMD, so you have a good feeling for if something moved into your state or not? I mean, I'm looking at this from an ability. I look at a premises ID as a 911 address. It is there if you ever need it. You might never need it. God forbid we get FMD. If we are not capturing these site identifiers and storing these in records, producer records, packer records, state records, fed records, we're going to be way behind the 8 ball in trying to connect any information. And I'll go into that in a second. So when you look at sow boar surveillance, and I know we're having discussions with USDA on how best to use the tag for the pseudorabies and brucellosis, but regardless, let's just say that we didn't even do surveillance at the packing plant on the south side. Just having those tags show up, and if those tags are captured, not necessarily samples with them, but if we're starting to scan in those tags, we're going to start developing a database of active sow farms that are out there. If we can work with USDA to figure out how to dump that into the national repository, all of a sudden all 50 states you could develop a way to ping it to say, all right, here's your active sow farms. Or more importantly, here's your sow farms that don't have pigs anymore. Maybe you ought to go figure out what's going on. Why are there no more, did they shut down? Are they out? Did everything die? Those are important things to know, I think. But I don't think we've lost anything if we can make sure that with every animal that goes in on the south side that she or he is attached to a premises ID of the farm she was on prior to entering harvest channels. Regardless of what we ever want to do with surveillance out of that, just from a preparedness standpoint, that's a big deal. If you look at the market hog side, that's why we want to do the pins on the bills of lading so the packers on the market hog side can capture that information and keep it in their records. If it's in their records the day that we have a real problem where the state vet needs to know some information from that packer, then we have prem IDs with loads. That's a pretty big deal, I think, from a preparedness standpoint. Again, regardless of what we want to do on the surveillance side, just having it built in there as a 911 address is going to be huge if we ever need it. Where we really learned the lesson about having pins was with PED. The day that we found PED, if all the producers in the United States stood up and said, share all of my information so we know where this disease is, we wouldn't have been able to do it because nobody was putting premises ID numbers on diagnostic laboratory submission forms. You know what the address on a diagnostic laboratory submission form is for? The clinic or the business that submitted it, so they know where to send the check or the bill so they can get paid. So we saw we talked to the diagnostic labs that routinely take swine samples, and so between Minnesota and Iowa, they do 95% of the swine diagnostic business. They were getting less than 5% of their diagnostic laboratory submission forms with any site identifier on them for the site, the actual site. With our lessons learned from PED, which is a bad way to learn our lessons because we've been educating on let's use these prems on diagnostic forms. We better get used to doing this. We're now seeing compliance over 80% because of the federal order and the education that's gone out to try to get compliance with that. And again, it's pretty helpful. Pins on forms tend to actually increase when you can't get paid for your diagnostics if you don't have one. So that, there's that incentive again. And so we're really focused on, not just for PED, any sample that goes in from a site really needs to have a prem ID on it, because the day that you need it and it's not there, you're just going to have to start from day zero. If this had been foot and mouth disease, and that day the day of foot and mouth disease, we wanted to know where it was and where it wasn't, trying to dip into the diagnostic labs and the samples that they keep, we still wouldn't have been able to know because no one was putting pins on diagnostic lab forms. So this is kind of, if we can start doing our surveillance and start capturing that type of information. So every sample that comes out of the stream, in my mind, should have a premises ID stuck to it. And somebody needs to capture that information and hold it somewhere until it's needed. And so the D labs can do this, the federal labs could do this. All of this information could be held within the producer data as well. But if we can capture all of this by Prem ID, and we have all of our movements through the Swine ID Plan caught by Prem ID, and we have two of the most important components for epidemiological investigations for these type of outbreaks, to be able to try to figure out where the disease is or isn't. And so what we've been doing is we've been taking the Swine ID program standards and working with Iowa State University and the Institute for Infectious Animal Diseases out of Texas A&M. They have a grant from Homeland Security. They're engaged to excel, and it is using AgConnect to actually build the data sharing components that would be needed for a foreign animal disease outbreak, for the state vet to visualize for a foreign animal disease outbreak, to see if we could actually make those connections and make this thing happen. So we found our first production system in Iowa that wanted to participate in this. It's Elite Pork. Dr. Craig Rolls, who was a huge champion of this. And so what we did is we worked with the state vet's office, Dr. Schmidt, Iowa State University, and then Dr. Rolls uses a third-party database management company to manage production data. He gave permission to share all the information that would be needed. So this would be full traceability of his livestock, as well as testing results coming out of the lab, and all of it was connected by Prem ID. And I was just in the Dr. Schmidt's office a couple weeks ago. This particular pilot is being expanded to other production systems in Iowa, and we were able, or Dr. Schmidt was able to actually look at a production system and see all of those things that they would need to see in order to make a determination as to the risk of that system for exposure to the foreign animal disease, but more importantly, being able to make decisions on whether that system could move or not based on the risk. And so it worked out really, really well. And we were able to do those type of connections in real time, which was great. And then we have 5 production systems in the country right now that are working with Tammy Beckham's Institute for Infectious Animal Diseases, and are in the process or have completed the process of sharing this data, being able to share this data through AgConnect with the state animal health officials. So pretty exciting stuff, but that's kind of where we're going with all this traceability. It's just the foundation for everything else that we need to be able to do to kind of define that compartment within the swine industry that is wanting to share this type of information in order to have preparedness benefits, trade benefits, and response benefits. So.